I'll bet Senator Isakson is a little bit surprised that his farewell address would produce such an eruption of bipartisan speeches, both in the luncheon that we just had for nearly 100 senators. Almost everybody was there, Democrats and Republicans. And then the 50 or so senators are going to speak on the floor. And as I listened carefully to Senator Isakson's own remarks about partisanship, it kind of reminded me of the preacher on Sunday talking to the congregation saying, I'm not so worried about what you do during this 1 hour while you're in church. It's your behavior between now and next Sunday during the 1 hour in church. I think what Johnny Isakson is saying is that the speeches about bipartisanship are admirable and good. But what he'd like to suggest to us is that what we need to do is have a little better behavior, follow those speeches a little better between now and the next time we have a group of speeches. Johnny learned a long time ago that if all you want to do is take a position or make a speech, that you don't need to go to all the trouble to come to the United States Senate. You can get a radio program or you can get a street corner. If you want to come to the United States Senate, you're supposed to get something done. I like to say to our constituents in Tennessee that I encourage them to look at Washington, D.C. as if it were a split-screen television set. On the one side, you see where most people are watching, you see impeachment, tweets, Supreme Court controversies. On the other side, where very few probably watch, you see senators like Johnny Isakson working to pass an opioids bill, or senators working to pay songwriters a fair amount for what they do, or appropriations members working to set a record, as Senator Blunt and Senator Murray have, for example, in terms of funding for biomedical research. All that's on the side of the television screen where Johnny Isakson has spent most of his 15 years. Senator Murray of Washington, during her remarks, talked very accurately about what happened in 2015 when we were working on fixing No Child Left Behind. That was not easy to do. Working on legislation to try to set rules for elementary and secondary education is like being at a University of Tennessee football game where you've got 100,000 people in the stands, all of whom know what the next play ought to be, and when the coach doesn't call it, they have an opinion about that. Well, everybody's had a little education, so they had a lot to say about how we would fix No Child Left Behind. And finally, we just ground to a halt over preschool education and what the federal role ought to be. Senator Murray felt very strongly about it. As she said, she's a former kindergarten teacher. So I stepped back and I said, well, why don't you and Senator Isakson sit down and see if you can come up with a solution, and if you do, we'll take that. Well, they did. They presented it to us. We took it. It went in the bill. President Obama signed the law fixing No Child Left Behind and called it a Christmas miracle. Same thing happened on the Workforce Investment Act. Again, Senator Murray and Senator Isakson sat down and worked together to solve a problem that the rest of us couldn't solve. Or Senator Reid, who just spoke, worked with Johnny on sunscreen. Or Senator Tester worked to make it easier for veterans to get care near their home. Or Senator Casey from Pennsylvania. All these Democrats working with Senator Isakson on the most important piece of legislation to govern the sale of over-the-counter drugs, which I hope the Senate will adopt either this week or next week. Now, all that was done not because these senators gave up their principles or not because they're not good negotiators. I think Johnny would say that Senator Murray is as tough a negotiator as you can find in the United States Senate. But the difference is they all also understood that we're here to get results, not just to take a position, not just to make a speech, but to see if we can get a result. That's why Senator Isakson has had so many senators praise him today, because he understands that it's hard to get here, it's hard to stay here, and while you're here, you might as well try to accomplish something for the country. Johnny Isakson knows it's hard to get here. He started in 1974. He lost his first race. Then he was on the ballot 20 times. He won 18 of those times. He knows it's hard to stay here. A year before he ran for re-election this last time, he announced that he has Parkinson's disease. Johnny Isakson has legislated, as has been mentioned, with his heart. When we worked on skin cancer, he talked about his skin cancer. When we worked on an Opioids Response Act, he talked about his family's loss because of an opioids overdose. And he's not been afraid to stick his neck out. There was a time during the Atlanta Olympics when one of the county commissions passed a resolution saying gays aren't welcome at the Olympics. Senator Isakson said, he wasn't a senator then, the Bill of Rights does not have an asterisk in it. The Bill of Rights is for everyone. And as his comments about John Lewis would reflect, Johnny Isakson was willing to speak out for civil rights in the South when not everybody was. I often think that members of the United States Senate are generally men and women who once sat in the front row of their first grade class with their hand up, hoping that the teacher would call on them. These aren't a reticent bunch of men and women. And I'm sure Johnny Isakson sat on the front row of his first grade class, but I'm also sure that he raised his hand and he conducted himself that caused all of his classmates to like him and admire him and elect him as their leader, because that's happened to him all throughout his life. The luncheon we had today was an extraordinary event, a bipartisan occasion. I don't remember anything like it in my time here, just to honor a retiring member of the Senate. And as someone said, listening to the speeches by the handful of Democrats and Republicans who spoke, you wouldn't have known which party Johnny Isakson came from. Our love for Johnny is great, but his greater legacy is something else. What is more important is that he, by his example, has reminded us why we are here. Reminded us that if you are a United States Senator, it's hard to get here, it's hard to stay here, and while you're here, you might as well try to accomplish something good for the country. That is Johnny Isakson's legacy, and that is something we should be grateful for and remember. I thank the President. I yield the floor.